Prayer seems to be a universal practice across religions. It can be a source of spiritual connection, guidance, and clarity. Prayer can also provide emotional support through challenging times. So it makes sense when people become interested in Thelema, they ask questions like, how can I pray as a Thelemite? Thank you for asking. You are not alone. It's a topic I hear so often that I decided to turn it into a presentation. By the end of this video, you will not only know how we approach prayer within Thelema, but also the history and practical use of prayer. Prayer in Thelema is not Christianity repackaged. Like everything else, it has a specific meaning and purpose unique to Thelema. Of course, not every Thelemite practices Thelema the same, so please keep that in mind. I offer you some historical context and my own personal perspective, which you are welcome to take or leave. Prayer is actually a very controversial topic that I know already out of the gate is going to offend and upset some people. Prayer is a loaded word with connotations that some people don't like. For those people, hold on to your pants. Before you start breathing heavily and typing furiously, we need to first define what prayer even meant to Crowley. We need to return to the source material and drag out history and context before exploring the topic, which I do. So chill out and enjoy the ride I'm about to take you on. This is how I've decided to approach this topic. If you're new to this channel, welcome. My interests can be very academic, but I am also a practitioner who seeks to give you practical tools as well. First, we have to talk about a definition of prayer so that we can narrow the focus of the conversation. We are not talking about all prayer in every religion or potential meaning. Our focus is Thelema and Aleister Crowley. Next, we get into where you find prayer and notable Thelemic rituals and practices. Then I have a short exploration of the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage and Aleister Crowley. And then finally, I get into what it means to me personally and some practical advice. I left the personal stuff as the last thing I'm going to talk about in this presentation because I know people usually don't watch that far and I don't particularly enjoy sharing personal things about myself. So if you watch it that far in the video, then it could be like a treat for you. So let's get into the meat and bones of what prayer is. Prayer is often perceived as asking for things from a higher power, such as getting on your hands and knees and begging a higher power to cure someone's illness. But it doesn't have to be. Prayer can take many forms and be for many different purposes. For example, some prayer is not a petition at all. It is instead an act of devotion to get closer to a deity. Prayers can also be an act of meditation, sometimes utilized by atheists or agnostics even. People undoubtedly have a lot of preconceived notions of what is prayer, but I would like to challenge you to perhaps step outside of what you already know and approach it differently, since this will be the key to understanding prayer within Thelema. The Springer Encyclopedia of Behavioral Medicine has a definition of prayer that I absolutely love for a number of reasons, but it also calls to mind the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. That's something to keep in mind as I share this definition with you. Prayer in all of its variations can be defined by two fundamental principles. One, prayer is a form of communication, and two, the exchange of communication takes place between the self and the transcendent, immanent, are numinous forces that represent human notions of the sacred. On your screen is a picture of Crowley's hands in a yogic mudra or magical gesture. In the confessions that Symonds did with Kenneth Grant, the gesture in the photo that Crowley is doing is described as affirming the union of the active and the passive. As we will explore in great detail to come, Crowley saw prayer in a similar way to the definition we just talked about. To him, prayer was the communication of the self and the transcendent forces that represent human notions of the sacred. One example of this is the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, which is a central concept to the great work of Thelema. That's a lot of jargon to say that Crowley was making use of prayer in his life and in his rituals like many other Thelemites do today. Let's talk about both, starting with the historical and Crowley. Crowley says this about prayer and meditation in Book 4, Part 1, Preliminary Remarks. Quote, "On investigating what is meant by these two things, we find that they are only one. For what is the state of either prayer or meditation? It is the restraining of the mind to a single act, state, or thought." Crowley says this on the Censer and Incense. I unfortunately don't have this book on hand, but it's Book 4, Part 2, The Magic Fire. Quote, "Into this fire he cast the incense, symbolic of prayer, the gross vehicle or image of his aspiration. Our prayer is the expression of the lower, aspiring to the higher." Also, I have another interesting example. In his diary, 1906, Crowley speaks of praying and fasting and likened aspiration to knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. So, for him, it was a constant silent prayer. Like I said, one important example of prayer to Crowley within Thelema is this example of knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. So let's get into more examples and get really into it. The next example I want to talk about is the Gnostic Mass. The Gnostic Mass is an important ritual for me personally, and it's something I perform and participate in as much as possible. Right now, that means about once a month. This is a clip of our Gnostic Mass set up in high altar at Star of Babylon. The Gnostic Mass is the central public ritual of the OTO, or Ordo Templi Orientis. The OTO is basically a magical fraternity that Crowley was very influential in. Aleister Crowley wrote the Gnostic Mass in 1913 in Moscow. It is a ritual that celebrates life and the divinity within us all. There is a part of the Gnostic Mass called the Earth Collect, where the deacon says, quote, "Mother of fertility, on whose breath lieth water, whose cheek is caressed by air, and whose heart is the sun's fire, womb of all life, reoccurring grace of seasons, answer favorably the prayer of labor." End quote. And of course it goes on. But a collect is essentially a short prayer uttered at a gathering of worshippers, just like it is done at the Gnostic Mass. Also, we perform baptisms and confirmations as part of our church that involves prayer. The baptisms and confirmations I'm going to talk about are an expression of our modern church, the EGC, or Ecclesiastica Gnostica Catholica. The EGC is the ecclesiastical arm of the OTO. These rituals, the baptism and confirmation, were not explicitly written by Crowley. He had outlines for them, but they were fleshed out in the modern day. The screenshots on your page are from the Invisible Basilica of Sabazius. Those links are in the description of my video if you want to read through those rituals in their entirety. I had the joy of going through these rituals myself as a candidate, as well as sponsoring others for their own baptisms and confirmations, and I continue to do so. Baptisms for us symbolize a birth into the Thelemic community. Confirmation represents the first conscious manifestation of the true will. There is a part of these rituals that says, Gloria Patria et Matri et Filio et Filia, and so on. That part comes right out of the ritual The Star Sapphire, which was written by Aleister Crowley. Then there is this part that goes, Now I begin to pray, thou child, holy thy name and undefiled. Thy reign is come, thy will is done, and so on. That comes right out of the Mass of the Phoenix, which is another ritual that was written by Aleister Crowley. This is a first edition of the Book of Lies. The Book of Lies was written by Aleister Crowley and published in 1912 or 1913. This is a beautiful copy that I was fortunate enough to be able to fondle and show you all. People often talk about this being a very complex text overloaded with symbolism and meaning. It can be difficult to approach. In this case, we are particularly interested in this because this is the first place that the Star Sapphire and Mass of the Phoenix appeared. The Star Sapphire is Aleister Crowley's spin on the hexagram ritual of the Golden Dawn. The Star Sapphire also appears in Magick in Theory and Practice, where it was reprinted. This is another book I am blessed to be able to share with you all on camera. It's nice to be able to look through these books and see specifically where these rituals come from. The Mass of the Phoenix is a Eucharistic ritual. In Liber Aleph, Crowley puts the Mass of the Phoenix on par with the Gnostic Mass. I sort of think about Mass of the Phoenix as a solo Eucharistic ritual that can be done daily, whereas the Gnostic Mass is a group Eucharistic ritual. Again, we are looking at that beautiful Book of Lies first edition with Mass of the Phoenix where it was first printed. Another example that is important to me and also a lot of other Thelemites is the ritual Liber vel Helios, which is meant to be performed daily at the 4 stations of the sun. I have a video all about that, so if you want to get into the details of Liber then be sure to check that video out. Liber is essentially a solar adoration ritual written by Aleister Crowley, which kicks off with the strong language, "Hail unto thee." It can be thought of as a type of prayer to align yourself with the solar forces and to eventually draw energy from the sun itself. It also injects mindfulness into your day. Liber vel Helios first appeared in the Equinox, Volume 1, Number 6. This is a 1974 Weiser reprint of the Equinox. The first edition was printed in 1911. This is a beautiful book and a really cool ritual. What I feel is another really important text dealing with the subject of Thelemic prayer is Liber Astarte. Liber Astarte was originally printed in 1912. This is the Weiser reprint in Equinox, Volume 1, Number 7. This is the text that deals with devotion and bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga is all about devotion towards a personal deity. Essentially, this text is Crowley's guide and suggestions for deity work. The goal of this work is to ultimately unite yourself with a deity by devotion. Of course, part of that work is prayer. Your relationship with that deity will evolve from worshiper to friend to lover to eventually seeing yourself in that deity and uniting with it. So let's talk about how Crowley used prayer as part of his practice to scry the Enochian aethers. Let's talk about the vision and the voice. The Vision and the Voice is a holy text, class A and B. As a side note, all of the Thelemic holy texts have different classifications. This one just happens to be both A and B. So anyways, the Vision and the Voice is the account of Crowley scrying the 30 Enochian aethers. He received visions from the aethers that were essentially his personal initiatory journey, as well as some more universal knowledge on the Thelemic gods and goddesses, including as Babylon. Also, I'm using the terms god and goddess. If those don't work for you, obviously throw that away as well and substitute with your own beliefs. According to the confessions in his travels during the Vision and the Voice, Crowley did 5 Orthodox Islamic prayers daily. So as you can see in this essential holy text within Thelema, prayer was a key part of this work. Something to talk about is this term, inflame thyself in prayer. You will hear a lot of modern practitioners as well as Crowley talk about this and use this language. That phrasing comes from the Sacred Magick of Abramelin the Mage. So here is that book, The Sacred Magick of Abramelin the Mage, and of course, Crowley replaced it in Liber Samekh, which is his system for knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel. So this inflaming yourself in prayer is a technique to achieve knowledge and conversation, otherwise known as K&C. So this, in my opinion, brings us up to the more modern practices, which I look forward to talking to you about. We have explored the context and filled in some details around the history of how Crowley himself and modern practices make use of prayer. Now, of course, Crowley is not the end-all be-all. If you're someone approaching this, hoping to use this as a practitioner and apply it to your work, I gave you a lot of options there, but now we're sort of transitioning to what I think personally. One passage I read out of the new book, The Way of the Will, by David Shoemaker. This one just came out, and I did an interview with him and all that good stuff, but there's a passage there that's so applicable and so well written that I thought I would just refer to his expertise and read directly from this book because it's so good and I think it's worth your while. So this is in response to saying more about invoke often and inflaming oneself in prayer. Any excuse you have for practicing the muscles of invocation will help you in your path towards K&C. And just as a note, remember K&C is knowledge and conversation. This is something available to you every day if you're doing Liber, for example. 4 times a day, you have a chance to invoke an aspect of deity, and during the unity section, you have a chance to invoke the oneness behind all these partial aspects. If you like, the quarterly adorations, much like Liber Astarte, allow you to worship an intentionally partial aspect of deity with all your might. But then in the unity section, you adore the idea of the undivided unity beyond all things symbolized by the sun. For those in the pre-KNC phase of aspiration, anything we can conceptualize as the ultimate deity, highest divinity, godhood, and so on is our closest approximation to the eventual reality of the HGA. HGA stands for Holy Guardian Angel, of course. That's simply the best our Ruach can do prior to KNC. Our everyday minds are limited to the creation of masks of divinity, and we cannot consciously behold divinity as we can after KNZ. Invoking often gives us practice with those muscles, and we will eventually need to use in a very directed and specific way with the HGA. Enflaming oneself in prayer involves a related set of devotional tools for firing up our ecstasy, also our essential muscles for the greater work of KNC. In everyday practice, you can practice this by focusing on the awesome power and magnitude of the archangels of the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, or Kether point in the Kabbalistic cross. So it goes on, but I think that really makes the point well that for me too, personally, as a Thelemite, it's about daily practice of prayer, performing Liber, saying will, if you consider that prayer, and continually checking in with myself and making that a beautiful part of my work daily, monthly if I am doing the Gnostic Mass and have that privilege, as well as yearly. So I hope that inspires you. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I'm the center of expression for the primal will to good, and so are you.